Hey, everybody. I'm Brett Kinsella. This is GAIN, the Generative AI News Rundown. We do this every week, and we talk about the top stories of generative AI. This is the end of summer, and it is a huge week. We had ChatGPT Enterprise, the long-awaited, coming out, and we'll talk about that really right at the top. But we also have Google gets its mojo back, its generative AI mojo. Google Cloud Next had a ton of announcements. We're going to talk about at least 15 of them today. Plus, we have huge funding rounds from 3 different companies and big valuations. Plus, we've got new products, all the stuff that you've come to expect here. I hope you really enjoy the show. We're going to get started in just one moment. All right, Eric Schwartz, my colleague, my co-host, the head writer at VoiceBot.ai, is here to help us break down all of the big stories here in generative AI.
Yes, extra big.
Yes, what a way to close the summer. And because Google is so prominent, we did this once before after Google I/O. We had our good friend, Alan Firstenberg, join us to jump in on the commentary this week because Google Cloud Next finally looks like Google might be getting its act together. And Alan might have a few credentials for being a GDE for a lot of Google technologies that have been discontinued. Maybe 1 or 2 that are still around, sort of life support, maybe going better. But I have a feeling GDE and other areas are coming too. Alan, thanks for joining us.
Brett, always good to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Okay, so this should be super fun. Hey, folks, if you're in the audience right now on LinkedIn, on YouTube, just let us know. Jump into the comments. Let us know that you're here. Also, feel free. We welcome it. Make comments, add questions, whatever it is that you think about these stories that would be particularly interesting. Okay, so top story this week, and we'll get right into it. We're going to start with this. This is our warm-up. Right. And we'll talk about our warm up. I think Alan thinks some of this is kind of funny, but ChatGPT Enterprise came out this week. And this is something that they hinted at when they brought in the new security capabilities not too long ago. And this is ChatGPT with a bunch of enterprise capabilities. And so we sort of broke this out nicely for folks. 7 things you need to know. So the first thing is you're going to have to wait for access just to keep people up to speed on that. And you won't know pricing right away either because you have to wait for access. And I think it's going to bias towards big companies the way I see it because there's something else later on that we'll see. Although there are a few small companies that are in there right now. Enterprise class security for ChatGPT. I mean, is it like bulletproof? But it's the basics, right? I mean, I think that's the really important thing that I was thinking about. Enterprise class management tools. So we've got some consoles. Like there's a difference between just having security and be able to manage this from a centralized standpoint. So that's also very basic stuff. I'm sure they're going to have to add a lot more to that. A better ChatGPT. They talked about some upgrades in this, which we can get into a little bit more. But essentially, GPT-4 with larger context in the window, faster speeds, 2 times faster, very important. And there's a bunch of new features coming. Customization, availability for all team sizes, power tools, which are basically this advanced data analysis, which used to be called code interpreter, but it's going to be broader on that. We can talk about that. And then functional solutions, this idea that they're going to have something that's very specific to your role and that it's going to encroach on, I think, some other third-party software providers. So that's the quick rundown. Shout out to Cohen, Anne and Mega, who joined us in the chat here. Appreciate you all being here today. Okay, Eric, let's start with you. What's going on? ChatGPT Enterprise, what do you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a surprise by any means. It's something that OpenAI has talked about going back to almost the launch of ChatGPT, and especially when they came out with ChatGPT Plus, which was obviously aimed at the sort of individual consumer. They hinted even then that enterprise was in the works. Right. But as you pointed out, that to make it competitive or make it functional, they needed a lot of support in terms of the security and the other elements. So I think that's probably why it took this long. But if there's one thing that you and I have talked about a lot this summer, honestly, is that this is the moment for enterprise and generative AI. This is when all the funding, all of the new features, all the new tools are coming out for in the enterprise space. So it's not this now the big moment for OpenAI to do that.
And I think a lot of enterprises want to use ChatGPT because their users already know how to use it. It's sort of proven. The board members understand it, like all your different stakeholders. If you can use this, it's almost like, oh, this is sort of the low risk approach.
Yep.
Alan, you're an enterprise guy. What do you think?
I mean, I think the biggest thing that this is to me is that OpenAI is beginning to grow up. Previously OpenAI was very much it was a technology company. They're pumping out new models, new uses of the models. It was all focused on what cool things are we doing with this technology? And now they're finally saying, oh yeah, we need to give you a console to manage it. We need to give you user management. We need to give you all of these things that aren't cool and sexy and AI, but that you need. And I think they're kind of realizing that and growing up. Whereas before they could say, oh yeah, you're sending us data and we're doing something with it. Now their users are saying, yeah, what are you doing with it? I think it's a good sign. I think it was great to see. I'm kind of curious how it's eventually going to conflict with what Microsoft has been offering.
Yes, absolutely. I think it does, or it certainly would take the place of some of the things I think they want to do with Bing Chat Enterprise and with Teams. But I'm not sure Microsoft cares because they own both, and they really want ChatGPT, or they want OpenAI to generate a lot of revenue, because all that money they invested in the company, they get back 70% of, we'll call it profit, but I think it's like net income, or excuse me, probably positive EBITDA or something like that, but free cash flow until their 10 billion is back. It's like sort of this free investment they got in the company, which is amazing. But I think that's a really important thing for people to think about. Will there be channel conflict between Microsoft, the parent, and OpenAI? But I think that's going to be, I think that's going to come out in the wash. I don't think that's a huge issue. I do think this 32K context window is really important. We saw, actually, we saw something along these lines as well at Google, which we can talk about. But this larger context window, which most people haven't had access to, very limited access through APIs, not in ChatGPT for sure. For enterprise use cases, a lot of these summarization functions, a lot of things that you want to do, which might be sort of longer, more involved, being able to do 32,000 tokens, 25,000 words or so, that's going to be, I think, a big deal. And plus, it's like speeding it up. I wish they would give that to everybody. GPT-4 is way too slow, and I'm assuming that's going to be a big change architecturally for GPT-5, because GPT 3.5 super fast. They haven't been able to actually get that type of speed out of GPT-4 just because of the size of the model and the way that's architected. Really big. But the other thing, I really just think this idea of power tools, so advanced data analysis, which used to be code interpreter, I interpret that as them saying, hey, it's not just going to be interpreting code. Why don't we just have something that can analyze anything that we have, particularly something that's semi-structured?
I think the big thing on that is that code interpreter was a terrible name, because under the hood, that's what it did. But what everyone was saying were things like, sure, you just upload some data and it does something.
Yes.
Nobody cared about how it was doing something. And I think that's them acknowledging nobody cared how it was doing something. But this is a tool that people will be able to use. And I think that's going to make it an interesting one to see how other folks compete with.
So do you think, along those lines too, do you think software companies, it's like SaaS companies that are trying to build these function-specific applications for data scientists, for customer service agents, for marketers, those types of things, should they be concerned that they've said, hey, ChatGPT Enterprise is going to have these role-specific capabilities coming out in the future?
I think they might be. I mean, certainly I've been concerned where I see the company start to edge in on stuff that I'm doing. And I'm seeing clients a little bit concerned. On the other hand, the small companies are maybe hoping that OpenAI is going to buy them. That, that OpenAI is now, going to be doing what Google and Microsoft did for ages. And that's, where
That would be
they've got
fascinating.
where they've got a niche, buy them.
That would be really fascinating if they start doing a roll up of successful companies in the space. And by the way, they would have the data to see which ones are doing well. Eric, any final comments on that point? I have one more OpenAI thing.
Only to say that OpenAI had been pursuing the APIs at first, and are still working on those in terms of more customization, more fine tuning, things like that. But I think that they understand now that sometimes what companies want is not necessarily to bring everything into their own system, but to have access to a system that can work with what they have, just if only for speed purposes. And I think that that's going to be a sort of dual track for a lot of other generative AI developers.
I think it's a huge advantage for OpenAI right now because so many third-party software developers are relying on OpenAI's APIs, and that ChatGPT is going to integrate with those, you would think, more seamlessly. We already have the idea of plugins, but there could be a different architecture that emerges here as well. But I think this idea of compatibility is really interesting because if you're building on some of these others, maybe it's harder. I don't know for sure. You would think everything just becomes a web service, but if you look at what Microsoft wants to do, integrating everything deeply with their existing software, with the generative AI tools, third-party tools flowing through there, I think this is really, really fascinating. Now, there's another story that's sort of making the rounds, which actually we talked about a week ago and talked about several times. So people all of a sudden think that, maybe OpenAI is generating a lot of revenue. So we had this thing saying, OpenAI is going to generate $1 billion over the next 12 months. Of course, we just wrote about this. It's ridiculous. If you look at sort of the conservative estimates of how many people are just paying for ChatGPT Plus, this year they'll probably do 350 to 450 on that product alone. Minimum, they're going to be doing 250 to 300 million. And the cost of running that, whether we believe that or not, at $700,000 a day, maybe it's more, maybe it's less. Even at that, they're going to be cash flow positive on ChatGPT. The other thing is that doesn't even consider all the API usage that people are hitting against, and other fees that they're probably getting from some of these cloud hosting providers, or Azure in particular. And the other thing too is they actually forecasted before ChatGPT Plus and ChatGPT Enterprise that they would make $1 billion next year. We're only 5 months ahead of 2024. So even if you say this, they're just a few months ahead of plan, people don't understand. This thing looks like it's going to be a cash machine. $1 billion, and I'm assuming they're going to make somewhere between $450 and $550 million this year, which is more than double what they forecasted, and next year probably closer to $2 billion.
Yeah, the people, the stories claiming that it's a black hole of cash were nonsense, and we knew that right away. But the rapid whiplash in narrative is pretty funny.
I mean, Alan, you're in the space too. You talk to a lot of developers. You have corporate clients. There are people using other models, but everybody is using OpenAI at some level.
I think what I've seen is that everybody thinks of OpenAI first. Even if you then go and say, I'd love to install a Llama 2 model locally, or I'd like to, be playing with Google's Palm, everybody is thinking in terms of OpenAI first. So at the very least, they have the mind share, and they have the first attempt that people try.
Yeah. Just to add one more thing to that too. If you are a corporate and you say, hey, I'm using Palm, and they'll say, how did that compare to OpenAI? All the people, because that's what everybody knows, right? And so it's you almost have to use it at some point on that level. Eric, final point on this?
Yeah, only just that I totally agree. I think the mind share at this point in time is really important, and OpenAI has picked it up the way Google has with search. People, no matter what you're using, people say, can you Google that? And people are going to say, use ChatGPT or ask ChatGPT for that, no matter what you're using. Okay.
That's one of our top stories. Everybody who's out there, if you are on LinkedIn Live or if you're on YouTube, give us a like. Also, just make a quick comment so that we know you're out there. You're certainly welcome to make a comment, ask a question. We'll work it into the show. Just want to let you know that we're here every week at 11 a.m. Eastern, talking about the generative AI news of the week. And we have a lot. And our first featured story, ChatGPT GPT Enterprise. It was maybe an hors d'oeuvre for what we have next. And one of the key reasons we have Alan here, Google Cloud Next is it's the big Google Cloud event of the year. And they made a lot of announcements. I think some of them are fairly significant, but more significant than that, I feel like Google finally has coherence in terms of its portfolio, in terms of the way it's talking about it. We can go through some of the different ideas here, but before we do that, Alan, just give me your general impressions. What's your hot take on Google Cloud Next and all the announcements?
Only one take. I feel like the big thing I got out of Cloud Next is that, in the past, these kinds of things are executive gets on stage, says something, invites another executive, usually from another company on stage. So,
Yes.
Repeat this for 3 or 4 hours. And there was certainly some of that. But I think also what we saw a lot was more of the hands-on, hey, this is what this does. I'm not just going to be tossing marketing jargon out at you. I want you to understand what's going on. I want you to be engaged. And I want to prove to you that I, Google, know what I'm talking about when it comes to this stuff. I'm not just a bit player here. And I think that really shined through.
Yeah, and I think what they've done is they've talked about generative AI for a long time, and they've chased the market with Bard, maybe a little too hastily. And we even saw in Google I/O, there's still a little bit of chasing going on. But now it's basically just like, oh, we have a bunch of stuff. It's actually ready. Let's just show it to you. And it's almost like we don't need to talk strategy anymore. Let's just show you what we have. And so let's go through some of the things that we talked about. So PaLM 2, new 32. I'll bring this up too. I've got the quick rundown. PaLM 2, 32K context window. We just talked about that, about ChatGPT Enterprise. Very helpful, particularly in enterprise settings. MedPaLM 2. So a customized version of PaLM for healthcare providers, going to be general availability next week. Imagine, they've got this visual appeal thing, which I thought was like, okay, fine. That's pretty low level and not that unique, but they do have a new watermarking feature, which I think is really interesting. And they probably didn't talk about it enough, but cloud people aren't as interested in pictures as they are in data. Llama 2 is now available on Google Cloud. Code Llama is now available on Google Cloud. Very interesting there. They're coming to parity now with Azure on that. Also indicates probably what they're seeing is what the market wants. Anthropic Cloud 2, they pre-announced. So that's going to be available. That's not a surprise to anybody. They had a $300 million investment in Anthropic earlier, but Claude, very good. 100,000 token context window and fast, really powerful tool. That's good. And then TII Falcon. So basically they announced 2 open source models for Google Cloud. So before we get into sort of software and some of the other deep dive things, any thoughts on the model garden, the foundation model strategy, and how that's playing out, Eric?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I can't believe they didn't talk about garden, cloud. There seems so many obvious metaphors that they didn't use. Yeah, it seemed very obvious to me that, and I don't know what happened there, but no, I think it's really crucial for Google. Again, we were talking about like mindshare, but along with the mindshare, you have to be able to have that at least some level of universal option that Google is sort of famous for, and that Microsoft has been pushing toward really rapidly. And so it makes a lot of sense that they would get all of the big names, or at least most of the big names, and a lot of the newer sort of hot models within their own space. They don't want anyone to say, we have to use Microsoft because Google can't do that. They might prefer Microsoft for other reasons, but at least now it's a lot less likely they'll say we have to use Microsoft because Google just doesn't do it. So I think that's the key element there.
Alan, thoughts on the foundation model side?
I have to admit, it surprised me when I saw that they announced Llama 2 support.
Yes.
I totally was not expecting that. I was expecting them to say, yeah, we're still offering model stuff for research purposes, but I wasn't expecting that. I think some of the proof is going to be in exactly how easy they make some of these models available. Is it going to be, one click and you're using it just like the PaLM 2 models?
Like it.
What was that?
It looked like it.
We'll see. It's certainly part of their model garden, but there are different. They treat different parts of the garden differently.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So we'll see exactly how easy it becomes to use, how quick you can launch it, what the support for it really ends up being. But it's going to be interesting to see, if I can make it just, if it's just as easy for me to say, I'm going with POM for these things, and then I'm going to do certain elements with MedPOM and then certain other things with Llama, because each one has their own pluses and minuses. That's a massive win.
Yeah. Well, the other thing too, very interesting. So you wonder, like, oh, okay, well, Meta is open source, Llama 2 is open source. So like, why would I like run that through Google Cloud? Isn't that what I'm trying to get away from? They were, how many times did they say there's no data leakage? We never see your data. We never train our models on your data. I mean, I think in the second hour it wasn't as much, but in the first hour, I think it was said 8 or 10 times.
I think also it's going to quickly be, the notion of, I can install an LLM on my desktop. And then when you start realizing that, I need to support this,
yes.
What does running it on my desktop mean? Am I now going to start, sticking servers in a closet again like I used to? Wait a minute, those were the bad old days. Why don't I have a cloud do this for me?
Yeah, so private cloud is like, it's the thing that they're going to do, and they're just going to have the segmentation. I think that's true. All right, let's get into applications, and Eric, you can lead us off on this, but I'll just I'll tee it up. So Duet, or Duet AI, as Alan likes to correct me. I just think they're going to drop the A eventually. I think there's some funny things about branding as well, about Duet versus Copilot, but essentially Duet's your Copilot for lots of different things now. In workspace, we saw it for data science, we saw it for security, we saw it for coding. Even before we get to, and then we had Vertex AI search and Vertex AI conversations, which I think are also very interesting. Oh, and then like AlloyDB AI, like easily overlooked, but I think very interesting. Eric, what is your view? You've written at least 2 stories on just the application layer that they talked about.
Yeah, I think 2 or 3 at this point. No, I think, well, first of all, yes, the calling it Duet is probably not ideal. I prefer Bard, but as a term. But I will say that the sort of expansive integration is notable. I mean, Workspace is everything that a lot of people use all the time. Gmail, Google Drive, and Docs and slides and everything. And people are used to sort of playing in that sandbox, moving between those apps really easily, collaborating with others through those apps. So now having this generative AI service within all those things is going to shorten the distance people have to cross in order to start using these tools.
Did I get that right? Did they say they have 1 million people using Duet already? Or did I miss?
Yeah, what they said was when they were doing their beta, because they announced Duet back at Google I/O actually.
Yeah.
But they said that they had I believe it was about more than 1 million users testing it over the last several months. Although who was testing which aspect of it, because again, Duet means a lot of things in different areas.
I mean, Alan, I wonder if just on, we'll talk in the productivity application layer, but we'll get deeper into the other aspects of Duet, which might be more interesting. But I have a feeling that this is actually coming to market. This is beating 365 Copilot to market in terms of broad availability.
It very well could be. I mean, one of the things though that's you have to remember is that Google's been incorporating AI stuff into Workspace for years. I mean, yes. Sheets had Explore for ages, and that was, had an AI foundation. So their infrastructure is well set up to add these sorts of things as individual one-offs. And that's what we've seen so far with Duet. You're going to have the ability to do image generation and stick it directly into a Google Doc. Okay, that's interesting. I think where it really starts to where it's not there yet, and it's where they're going, and this is where Microsoft does have a bit of a head start, is in the universal integration elements of it. Being able to kind of, search for things and have it show up in one place and generate the slides and generate your script and docs, putting all of that together. That's coming still. But these individual one-offs, it's easy to see how Google can quickly get those into the marketplace.
Go ahead.
I was only just add that it's notable that that Google made sure to highlight how they've overhauled chat as part of this. Not only putting Duet in, but actually just revamping sort of the look of it, and really trying to eat Slack's lunch, I would say. But whether that succeeds is of course debatable, but at least they can say, yes, you can start using Google Chat and all of the Duet things as well as the more traditional work Google services.
Doesn't this sounds like Allo to me? Was it Allo? Was that the one that they had with
Allo?
Yes.
Yes.
Is this the Allo strategy part 2?
Or part 3, depending on how you look at it. You know,
Jürgen Gravestein calls it the battle of the co-pilots has begun. So let's talk about the other co-pilots, which I think maybe Ellen, you and I found slightly more interesting, which was the ability to like generate an app just by using natural language to start it. What did you think?
That was in some ways fascinating. I picked up on this most during the developer demo, or sorry, the developer keynote on day 2.
Yes.
Where literally they're just having a conversation back and forth with a chatbot. And at the end of it, it spins up an app sheet, making sure I got that correct, an app sheet project, which has the tables defined, builds out the interface, builds the app for it, all of that stuff. And that second part is stuff that AppSheet's been able to do for a while. That's not new. The notion that you can just have a conversation and it builds it from that kind of blew my mind.
Yeah, and so to give some context to people who are listening or watching, what they did is they typed in, I think it was one sentence. They just say, I want this type of application that'll have reporting of incidents, and and they gave them like a couple variables like the person reporting, and then it just came back and basically created 2 databases. To start the process, and then they refined it a little bit more, and then they added workflow functionality, and then they turned it into they gave it a front end, so like a web front end, so that people could do it, and then they added voice input that would translate and then would automatically categorize the incident. It really was pretty fascinating. You can look at it and you say, oh, that was pretty basic, but they did this live in 4 minutes on stage.
I was hosting a watch party, and somebody walked out and came back 5 minutes later and was like, what just happened? Because they're demonstrating this, and we're like, oh, they just built that. And and it's true. The number of components that AppSheet puts together is amazing. And I think also one of the elements that was kind of missed in there or was glossed over is that voice input. It's not dictate something into specific fields. It is say something using natural language, and the fields got populated based on that.
Yes.
And you can then look at it and confirm that's what you wanted. But, in the voice industry, we've been dreaming of that for 7 years now, and it's there.
Yeah, I would say, this isn't the first sort of text to website service that we've seen, but because it's Google and because of some of the other elements involved, it goes deeper and in some ways broader than what's come before. And when I was watching it, all I could think about was how this feels like they had a meeting where they said, all right, we messed up with the Bard launch. Let's do the opposite of that and make it seem impossibly good somehow, even though it is live. So I feel like that's making up for a lot.
And there wasn't a lot of trappings. It wasn't like, we're amazing. It was just like, let us just show you this stuff. And I think it was really smart. Just let people draw their own conclusions, as opposed to, Ravi was up there and he was talking very positively about things, but there was no hyperbole that I could really detect.
Yeah, it was the understatedness of it actually made it seem more impressive.
Right. And certainly on the developer side, they were very much, let's cut right to the chase and try this, and hopefully it works.
They were sort of cut to the chase, but then they did those interludes where there was this little song and dance, some improv about Google lore. That was like so distracting.
Yeah, it suggested humor is not necessarily going to be AI generated soon.
It's interesting you say that, because I know a lot of people liked those glimpses back at Google's history and at,
I'm sure they
what was
did.
behind the scenes.
But like, great. I'm so happy they did that.
Well-
It's like, come on, like, give me the meat. Give me the meat. Okay.
Well, it's also a sign of how, what used to be like just for the most technical developer types is now being watched by the general public, and I don't know if necessarily the programming is caught up to that.
Yeah, and I think there's a good point there that the technical keynotes, I think in some ways over the last couple of years have been dumbed down a little bit, because they recognize that like a lot of media and analysts were following the technical keynotes as well, and so they made them maybe more accessible than they had been in the past. And so this seemed like maybe getting back to the technical keynote is for technical people, and technical people like this kind of humor apparently.
Yeah, some of the feedback I had heard about previous years' technical keynotes was, well, that was another day of marketing. Why did I sit through that?
Exactly. And it did not feel like that yesterday.
No.
Yeah. Michael Novak asked, was there any mention of plugins? And I think the answer is no. And they wouldn't have used that term. Yeah. They use a different term. What's their term?
I believe it was extensions.
Yeah,
or something
extensions.
like that. And
did we talk about the extensions?
No,
we haven't. I mean,
that's another one.
No,
they did.
Oh, what did they say? I'd missed it.
They said there were extensions.
Right. Yeah, but there wasn't any. We didn't see any.
No, they offered no information whatsoever.
And that should have shown up in my gaps discussion actually, because they made a big deal out of it. Oh, well, 15 seconds is a big deal, but they showed like 40 logos with extensions. Although that was really for Bard. So like, and that's another thing. Okay. So before we go into that, I think AlloyDB AI, I'll just like say this idea that basically turning Postgres into a vector database, pretty interesting.
It's interesting. I've got a lot of questions about this, which I haven't gotten answers to yet. The first is that they announced PG Vector Store for Postgres, the Cloud SQL, a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
And,
no one noticed.
Right. But both of these were because everyone else is doing it as well. Amazon's announced one. Azure has the same thing. What didn't get mentioned is that Google has had a vector database for about 2 years now, which nobody remembers.
Yeah, but they know Pinecone.
Which runs on Google Cloud, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, probably. You have to if you want money from them.
Right. So, they've got this matching engine. Nobody knows about it. Google barely talks about it. And it didn't get mentioned at all. So, I don't know. Once again, I've got questions that I don't have answers to yet.
It did get mentioned. I thought it got mentioned briefly late. It was really like it was a flyby, and I'm like, this is. I know some people who are like trying to use Postgres for their applications for knowledge retrieval right now. Not the vector version, but just Postgres, because it's like so much cheaper than using a vector database. It's also, you get better performance faster. And so they're trying to figure out what the limits are of using that. But like moving this into this with PG Vector, I think could be really interesting. I don't know that they're going to put enough wood behind the ball, if you think about that baseball metaphor, to like make it really fly. But so let's just hit a couple more things, because we have a lot more news to come up. Vertex AI search and Vertex AI conversation, particularly that latter one's going to be pretty interesting to a lot of people who are here and going to listen to this later. Alan, what's your read of this?
Well, I've been able to play with the earlier versions of this when they were called GenAI App Builder.
Yes.
This is in some ways kind of brilliant, because right now, we're seeing a lot of companies that are out there are doing things like, load all of your website and all of your PDFs into a database and you can do conversational search on it. Well, Google just announced that.
Yes.
And, oh, by the way, there's also an API. Oh, and by the way, you'll be able to do it by telephone because it integrates with Dialogflow CX. Oh, and by the way, you can, do other stuff. You can have actual interactions. And that was where the extensions part came in. That's where they mentioned extensions.
Oh, I see. Got it.
And this, we were talking before about how there were tons of startups that suddenly got their knees, cut off by OpenAI. Well, there are a bunch more that just got their knees cut off by Google. here's one click and you suddenly have an app that does a search that looks shockingly like Google search. And, it's
I
all
was
just there.
I was sitting there thinking Algolia has got a. I mean, and Algolia is doing a lot of work right now, and they've got some things that they've got a new vector database, which they haven't really talked about, but was debuted at their developer event, but they've never talked about it publicly other than that. So, I think like that's something that they're going to have to start thinking about. And I do believe that specialists generally do well in a lot of these markets anyway, particularly when they're growing fast, Pinecone, for example, because they give focus to one thing, right? As opposed to, I could talk to you about 100 things. Which one would you like me to talk about today? And then they miss their opportunity. Vertex AI conversation. We were back and forth on this in terms of how it works with Dialogflow, what that means for Dialogflow in the future. I thought I'd heard some rumors that we were talking about a rebranding of Dialogflow. This would seem like a logical way to do it. Just roll it into Vertex AI conversation. By the way, I think it would be a mistake, but that's usually Google generally makes branding mistakes. I think Dialogflow is like well known, broadly used. It's got a lot of things beyond that. It would be better if it's just a web service off of Vertex AI.
I can see it both ways. I don't have. No, I mean, in one hand, yeah, Dialogflow is well known. Unfortunately, Dialogflow CX is not well known.
Okay, fair enough.
Not terribly well liked in the conversational community.
This is also true.
So if they left Dialogflow ES, the old version of Dialogflow, as is, and it's also worth noting that Dialogflow ES and Dialogflow CX are completely incompatible with each other.
I didn't know that.
If they left the old Dialogflow as the old Dialogflow and took the new Dialogflow and turned it into Vertex AI conversations, I don't think anyone would cry.
Yeah, I always think about how, especially for a company like Google that has so many things going on at once, there's the technical ability that it can offer of what it theoretically can do. Then there's the aspect that you're talking about, like how good is it? Do people like it? How much the experience is? And then of course the business element of wanting to not take money away from itself as they go. And it does feel like Google was maybe not caught flat-footed, but definitely on the back foot when it came to a lot of the generative AI stuff. That everything they had was either still in the works or in there, available but not ready for public consumption. And now they're rushing ahead to get because they feel like they're behind. They're rushing ahead to put out, if not everything they have in this field, then at least a lot more quickly than they normally would. And that picture 5 years ago about how 10 years from now, from 5 years ago, 10 years from now, we'll be living the AI era. Now that's exactly the branding they're using for all of their stuff now. So I think it's sort of there, like, all right, well, we had a 10-year plan. Now it's a 1 month or 1 year plan.
That's what the ChatGPT moment did. All right, so I think that's going to wrap it up. That was a good way to say it. I will say that I think Google did get its mojo back. Really looks like more coherence. I think it's going to be a much stronger competitor in the next few months. I do also believe that it's doing so much, it's going to be a little difficult for people to like catch up, and it's going to be hard for them to they need to figure out what their traction point is, whether it's Duet or whether it's just having all the models or something else. And it's not clear to me that they figured that out. Although this idea of MedPalm and SecPalm, this idea of use case specific large language models, that might be a traction point for them to like just get known in those areas. And then if you're using those and you use the general purpose Palm and then you do these other things, and it really would fit with some of their expertise, having done these things for so long. So we'll close with that. Hey, shout out to Gil Ariel, Janice Mandel, Brian Ryder, Michael Novak, Donald Buckley. Thanks a lot for everybody for joining today. I know there's more of you out there. If you are on LinkedIn or YouTube, give us a like. It's right there. Just like click that button. Also, if you haven't made a comment, let us know you're here. Please do. And ask questions, things like that. Thanks a lot for participating. Okay, so that was a lot of Google news. We hit like the two big ones. We have a ton of more information. So we're going to do kind of speed round over the next 15 minutes or so on some of these things. And the first one I wanted to bring up was moving into our second segment of the week, the funding fountain So we talked about Google Cloud, Rain. We do the funding fountain. And our friends over at AI21 Labs just raised 155 million on a 1.4 billion dollar valuation. Although it's like maybe it's small compared to these days, like 1.4. But no, but that's really significant. I think, considering sort of where they've been. They also made another announcement about an upgrade to Wordtune. You wrote about both of these, Eric. Give us the rundown.
Yeah. So the new Wordtune, which has enterprise and other elements that we were just talking about in it, is definitely a big deal. And they hadn't planned on announcing their funding until next week. They don't want to
That's right,
step on their toes, but got out a little early, and so they rushed out the official announcement. But yeah, it's a lot of money. It's approximately doubling how much they've raised before, but puts them up in that unicorn territory. And it's a notable list of investors. But AI21 we've talked about how it's like not talked about at the same level as what Google or OpenAI and Microsoft are doing, but they've been pretty impressive right from the beginning. They have a lot of power, in the technical sense, for a relatively small company. And now I think that this is their coming out moment where they're going to be, if not a rival at the same level as OpenAI and Google, it's still going to be something that all the bigger companies have to consider when they're planning their own businesses.
Yeah, I think this was super important for them to be able to come out because there's the independence, Anthropic, Cohere, AI21 fits into that. They really have punched above their weight in terms of funding up to this point. Forget about valuation, for example, for a moment. And they also have this orthogonal strategy around, we have a general purpose foundation model, and then we have these APIs for tuned specific models, essentially functions that are specific to summarization and other features. And then they also have Wordtune, which is an application. And so I think they're better known for Wordtune than they are their foundation models. So they've got this sort of interesting business model, which I think gives them more flexibility, but they haven't been able to command sort of the same interest level as Cohere and Anthropic and a couple of the others in the independents. And so to me, this is like a really good sign that investors wanted to keep layering in here, but also to give them the capital to execute what I think is a pretty decent strategy for the market.
Yeah, their partnership with Google involving the TPUs and GPUs and some of the other things that Google brings to the table, I think is also important. It shows that they're positioned for scaling up really quickly, and that Google sees them as a valuable partner on the side of obviously of their own things. But I think at least so far, AI21 has been making a lot of really what now seem like very good decisions, both on the business level and on the technical side.
Any comments on this, Alan? Have you used Jurassic? No.
No, sad to say, I have not kept up with what they were doing nearly as much as I should have. There's just so much out there for me to keep up with.
No, they're really interesting. I always recommend people check it out. Plus, they have a playground. You go to Jurassic too. It's like it's very good. We've used it for a bunch of different things. So our next story is CoreWeave. So there's this rumored valuation of 5 to 8 billion. Okay, fine. Most people are going to say, who's CoreWeave? And there's this other thing around that this valuation is up from April, 2 billion. And it's like, what? 4 or 5 months later, is this true? Like, will they really get this? So I think there's a few different things going on here. But CoreWeave, just to give people a background, first of all, they're basically a cloud provider. And they are GPU and AI training and inference specific. I mean, that's really what they've zeroed in on. And if you think about it, like there's a few reasons why this, like there's a rationale for this, right? So, it looks like $1.5 billion business next year. Now it's cloud computing. There's costs associated with it. It was different than a software company. The Microsoft announced after their last fundraising that they're going to, or it was reported on that they have a contract in place to do billions of dollars. Inflection AI is one of their customers, and they blew away one of the ML perf performance tests with a 3,500 NVIDIA H100 Tensor Core GPU cluster. Like, if people are following that, that's like kind of a big deal. And we forgot to talk about, we'll talk about maybe next week, Google Cloud Next and all the hardware announcements. So some of those are very significant. They just had a $2.3 billion in debt financing deal earlier this month. So debt financing doesn't sound like a great thing, but they're actually building data centers. And they are also, more importantly, they are buying GPUs. And I thought this story was interesting for a couple of different reasons. One is they've done well recently because they actually bought a lot of H100s. They bought a bunch early, and then they realized in December that they had not ordered enough, and they ordered more. And so they actually have NVIDIA H100 GPUs, which are the most cost-efficient, powerful right now for the large language models training out there. So they just have something other people don't have. And when you look at this idea that they're tying 3,500 together and they just won this MLPerf benchmark, there's someone to pay attention to. Whether they're even going to get a $5 billion valuation on this is like not as important. The fact that in some ways that people are talking about it, and I think it goes beyond just the fact that they have abundance in GPUs when there's scarcity everywhere else. I don't know, Alan, if you have some thoughts on that.
I think what this really is kind of showing to me is that people are beginning to realize that the notion of GenAI as a service or large language models as a service is a big deal. And it's going to be bigger because, as kind of we alluded to before, you don't want to have to go through the effort of spinning up your own model, securing that, dealing with, you want an endpoint. I want to send my prompt. I want to get something back. That's all most people want. On some level, maybe I want to then say, okay, now I also want to train a model. But even that you want to do as simply and as easily as possible. And if that's what they're able to tap into, I can see why people would see them as a valuable up-and-comer, and especially if you've got the GPUs to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a related story here too, and maybe I'll have you jump in on this, Eric. You wrote about Modular, and they raised 100 million. I believe Modular, if I'm correct, they focus on optimization of training. So it's like a software play, but it's like everybody's focused on this idea that maybe compute is scarce at the moment for some of these AI workloads, and how can I solve that? Can I solve that with software? Can I just get access to CoreWeaves available GPU processing? What do you think? And tell us a little bit more about Modular too, Eric.
Yeah. So, just thinking about the valuation, valuation comes from a lot of things, and I wonder what percentage of that is just they own that many NVIDIA pieces of hardware. But Modular, their sort of the way they pitch themselves is that you need all this compute that maybe it's hard to build up enough just pure capacity to run a big LLM or to build up a customer base for it. And their idea is that they can improve that through improving the infrastructure itself behind it, so that information passes more quickly and without the friction of trying to coordinate these gigantic clusters of computing power. So what they do is speed up how quickly all of that computing power performs. They say up to 9 times faster than some of their alternatives. They're getting a lot of interest from enterprises and as well as smaller companies because of what they're able to bring to the table. And as part of that, they've even created a new programming language called Mojo that is supposed to be 35,000 times faster than Python, but also be as easy to use as Python. So it's all these shortcuts that people are looking for now that the actual computing power itself seems more expensive.
Well, I guess that kind of makes sense. I mean, Python's general purpose, just like a CPU is general purpose. The GPU is like, you tune it for single purpose. You can tune a new programming language for single purpose as well. I think that makes sense. There was sort of a little known or little tracked comment by the CEO in a Wall Street Journal article a couple of weeks ago, where he said that they announced basically in May the product. He said they had 30,000 inquiries from companies wanting to use their software because so many people are trying to figure out how to optimize their AI workloads, in part because it's expensive, but in part because they're having trouble getting access to GPUs.
Yeah, and I think we've been hinting at it or talking about it, but the enterprise side of things, the growth is so quick and so comprehensive in terms of where it's coming from that any company that can smooth things or make things faster while every company is scrambling to build up their enterprise AI capacity, I think is going to attract a lot of attention. So Modular fits right into that thing.
Yeah.
I honestly, I look at them and I think they're angling for either very rapid acquisition or possibly some sort of lucrative partnership with one of the bigger companies who want to corner the market here.
One of the cloud providers, or all the cloud providers, you would think. Big opportunity there. And I couldn't remember if we talked about Hugging Face last week, but because I think that came out right after.
Right afterward.
So 235 million. They hadn't raised money in a couple of years. Sort of a big deal. New valuation of 4.5 billion. I thought that was really fascinating. I mean, Hugging Face is sort of the central coordinating point for open source AI right now, I think, or particularly at least open source generative AI. So I guess that doesn't surprise me too much. That it just sort of shows their dominance in the space. And I don't even think they needed to raise money because they've got so much action. Ellen, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I don't know exactly why they raised money, but it wouldn't surprise me if at least part of it is because they're realizing that OpenAI and Google and all, and AWS to some extent have all actually launched platforms based on stuff that they've been providing. And now they're saying, well, we need to up our game with our platform. We need an enterprise offering as well. We need to, and if we feel we already have one, we need to make sure that enterprises know about it.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's where they need to be moving right now.
Absolutely. And just to highlight that point, in the funding round, Salesforce, Google, Amazon, NVIDIA, AMD, Intel, Qualcomm, IBM, and others, notably Microsoft's not in there. But all the big players want to have a little bit of Hugging Face halo effect because, hey, everybody loves the Hugging Face right now. Wow, we're just getting to Meta Code Llama. I don't even know how to do this. We got so many stories this week. Meta Code Llama. Ellen, what do you think this is going to do in the market?
I'm honestly not sure it's going to do all that much. And I see the shocked look there. And I think the reason why not is because we've already got a lot of we've got a lot of Copilot stuff out there already. Between GitHub's Copilot and Google offering their code models, do we need another one? And it's arguable, yeah, we do for a lot of reasons. But we'll see. I would note that Code Llama was one of the models that Google now has as part of their model garden. So it's not that it's ignorable. But it's I don't know what the big impact is going to be in the long run.
Well, so here's what I think. I think it might wind up being a niche, but there's a lot of organizations that don't want to have their code run through inference on OpenAI or Google's models. And so there's StarCoder from Hugging Face, but I have a feeling just like people are going to have a lot of confidence in Code Llama. Plus, the performance benchmarks are really strong right now in terms of coming out of the gate, really surprising, low, smaller model, good or better performance on a lot of these benchmarks. So I think it will be, I think it really will be a pretty interesting to see how it plays out. But you're right. Most of the people are going to be just happy with Copilot or with Cody or something else that, that shows up. I'm sure Google will launch another one because that's what they do.
Right. I mean, I think as it is, Google has a challenge to convince people to use theirs as opposed to using what they've already been using. That's going to be Google's challenge, and I don't know what Meta has behind it. What motivation does Meta have to push it any further than they already have?
Absolutely. Well, they actually do have an incentive because this is Zuckerberg's way of getting developers on their side. And actually, I've got another comment about them, but I'll sort of leave it for winners and losers of the week. Let's move on because we're running towards the end here. I did want to sort of I want to do a fun little thing.
Part of the way through the list, maybe.
No, we're not going to hit everything, but we're going to hit a couple more things. I did just want to throw this out because all of us are here and we know what's going on here. Harmon and JBL is the first to integrate both Alexa and Google Assistant. Now, people will say, no, Sonos has had this for years. No. This is different. like this device that almost nobody asks for and fewer people want. It's still very cool, and so I don't want to underestimate like the fact that we've got the big dogs finally collaborating. You can ask a Harmon JBL speaker. You can ask Alexa or Google Assistant simultaneously, like, and you can switch between them. You can start a timer with one, you can stop it with the other. It is really interesting, and it just goes to show that we should have had interoperability all along. I don't know, Alan, if you have any thoughts on this, but I thought it was a fun story, particularly it's like how irrelevant. It's like we've moved on to generative AI, but let's go back to the thing that no one would do that they should have done 2 years ago.
Right. This is, I mean, I laughed when I saw the headline. I think I read one paragraph just to make sure it was actually it wasn't another Sonos one. And my reaction was kind of like, well, is anybody going to care? I mean, anybody going to care? And I don't think so. I think it's cool. I'm glad to see it. I think, future generations of smart speakers will come online soon, I hope. And we'll be able to laugh at this bridge technology. But I had to laugh when I saw it.
Yeah, absolutely. Eric, any thoughts?
Just that I really like the sort of retro futuristic look of these things.
Yeah, they won you over with style.
Well, no, but I would say, but it felt almost retro writing about smart speakers and whether they can use one or the other of the
like
the
1970s. It's like nostalgia. Yeah. Remember when voice assistants were a thing?
Just the idea that it mattered so much which one you had.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's very funny. Okay. Hey, everybody, we're going to do winners and losers of the week in just a moment. So if you've got your winners or losers, throw them in the chat. We'll try to get to those as well. This is generative AI winners and losers of the week. So we're actually not going to be able to go through it really, but ConverseNow has a new chatbot. Give me 10 seconds on that, Eric.
Basically, restaurant drive-thrus are using ChatGPT and Google Bard's LLMs to improve the AI that you talk to when you order food.
Yeah, really interesting. We're seeing these domain-specific solutions that are using generative AI, and Gupshup is also working on this as well. Give me 10 seconds on that, Eric.
Yeah, Gupshup has a lot of vertical-specific AI, and especially for customer service. And now they're bringing that specialization into the generative AI space. So a lot of their customers are going to be happy about that.
And do you think this announcement of GM and Dialogflow for OnStar is like a thing? Do you think it's important or just like noise?
I think it's important to know as a sort of a benchmark that now that they've been working together on this for a while, and now that Google is exploding out with generative AI models for so many things, the automotive space is open and waiting for they've only seen a couple of droplets of ideas for how to use generative AI with cars, automotive voice AI. So I think this is the sign of something to come.
Yeah, we saw 3 or 4 examples at Google Cloud Next of big brands using some of the technology. We'll see if like how much they push it in the market and like what the adoption rate is. But I think it's a good sign for Google that this is happening. We'll talk about this more maybe next week. But Walmart has a new generative AI chatbot for its employees, which I thought was interesting. More interesting maybe is that it was announced on LinkedIn, like as opposed to another place. So it was the first place it came out. So I think that, you just look at these internal applications for generative AI, also very significant. All right. So I want to talk about winners and losers of the week. Hey, folks, if you're not signed up for Synthedia, that's a daily generative AI newsletter. Even Alan Firstenberg likes it and comments on it from time to time. And he's kind of the skeptic out there. So if he likes it, it's good. Just go to bit.ly/Synthedia and you can check that out. We've got some really good coverage on a couple of things recently. Taking a lot more research than I was expecting on this. Also, hey, like this stream if you haven't already. Appreciate it. Okay, Eric, give me a loser for the week. Who's the loser?
I want to say Salesforce, because as much as they're doing a lot and investing a lot, Google, as you said, it's sort of understated, but I really think that bringing generative AI into chat and making it part of the Google Workspace environment. I mean, I know so many companies where they'll and interact on Slack, but then go to Google for exchanging documents and information. And I feel like now you won't have to, and it's not going to be immediate or cause a huge problem right away. But I do wonder how the Salesforce team is feeling about things.
Could we get off Slack and go to Google? That would be wild. There's a lot of startups who would really make a lot of sense. I don't know though. Slack is pretty embedded. I don't know. Alan, your loser for the week.
This is going to be a shocking one. My loser is Google, and that is to be clear. I'm not talking about Google. I'm talking about Google.
Yes.
So I think there's a segment of Google that has not yet realized that it is behind on the AI curve, as illustrated by the rest of the company. And I think they're falling further and further behind. And until they realize that, they're going to keep falling behind.
And where are they falling behind, do you think?
If you look, for example, and we're going to see if this is true, in a few months, but I think Android really is not showing that they're paying any attention at all to the AI space.
But neither is Apple, so you're good.
Yeah. Well, that's probably what they're thinking. Yes.
I think that's really interesting. Android looks very tired right now, so we'll see where that goes. I really like that. My loser for the week is actually Amazon. And I think that Google sort of fumbling gave Amazon a chance to sort of get, take a little bit of space and sort of reorient itself. They were behind and they really weren't into it. There's some of the senior leadership was sort of against generative AI, even though they had some of the capabilities. But I think over the last 3 months, they have a really coherent strategy now of we're just infrastructure. And it looked like Google was heading down more towards we have our great stuff and we're going to promote that. And maybe we'll do a little bit on the side with these partners. But I have a sense that Google's trying to become more egalitarian in terms of the access to third-party models. And that's really the space Amazon has to own right now in order to be competitive. Whether Google does that or not, who knows? But I think Amazon has to look very closely at that because Google's got all the other tools that Amazon doesn't have yet. So they've got a lot of work to do. All right. So winners for the week, Ellen.
I'm sorry. For this one, it's also obvious. It's Google. I'm coming into it with a bias, but clear winner this week.
Because of what? Just pick one or two things. What are the two things that sort of stand out to you?
Because they demonstrated they know how to play music and have fun.
Oh, come on.
No, seriously, because they're the winner because they're able to say, and I don't think anybody else really is, that they are a one-stop shop.
Yeah.
If you want, if you want AI,
everything.
Google has everything.
Yeah, it does. It does have everything. That's a really, really good point. Michael Novak just threw an IBM loser this week, ? I think they lost 10 years ago, 20 years ago, actually. They never really turned Deep Blue into something that should have been. Eric, your winner for the week.
Well, I was tempted to say NVIDIA once again, but I think I'm actually going to say independent generative AI developers because between what Meta is doing, the new Hugging Face things, the thing we talked about last week, a giant new open source data set for training, I think that there's a lot of opportunity for clever developers who are independent or freelance to come up with some really exciting new ideas, and they have a lot more tools available to do so with.
Yeah, I'm sort of in a similar camp to you. I'm going to say Meta's the big winner. Having them show up so prominently in Google Cloud Next, so prominently in Azure right now. There's an interesting thing, if people remember the history here, in 2008, when mobile, in 2009, we were going through a lot of different things, but that's when Facebook went public, and they're like, you don't have a mobile strategy, and they're thinking about doing a phone, right? Same time that Amazon was working on a phone. And ultimately Zuckerberg decided not to do a phone. It was the smartest thing he could have done because he won. He was one of the winners of mobile because it was became the primary app initially on both of the leading platforms. He didn't have to compete with them. I have a feeling that this is the thing that's happening, that Meta's just flying under the radar. Like, oh yeah, we're just going to be everywhere. We're going to be sort of the open source alternative, which, will be the easy open source alternative because like we care about this. And then what Zuckerberg's part of his strategy is he wants people to use Meta generative AI because he thinks that then they will build things that are compatible for his products, in the Meta ecosystem. And that'll be a way for him to get developers back on board. And I will say too, that it is astounding to me at how they changed their name. They have kind of a disaster with Web3 sort of coming and going, just the interest, right, in it in the Horizon world. That's based on, they have this overhang of all these other problems that people were hating on Meta for years. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, thanks a lot for your open source models. We appreciate this. Like you're back in the club. We like you again. So I think just like every week I'm seeing that Meta is doing, it's almost like they've been rehabilitated in some way. Everybody wants them to succeed because they want this sort of big option and they've got so many capabilities. They're one of the few companies that actually can build the things that Google has. They just don't have like distribution through cloud and things like that. So I'm saying Meta's the big winner. Seamless, the new Whisper competitor we talked about recently, Code Llama, all these other things. So big stuff. Okay, folks, this has been so fun. Alan Firstenberg, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you again for having me on. This was great.
All right, Eric,
Yes.
once again, like another amazing week. I wish this could have easily been 2 hours, but we're not going to subject everybody to that. This is Gain, the Generative AI News Rundown. Join us again next week, 11 a.m. Hopefully, we'll see. We got some conflicts next week, but we're going to work on it. We're going to be back. We've been doing this. I think this is 30 or 31 weeks in a row. So hope everybody likes that. And if you missed it, just go watch the replay on YouTube, or if you missed part of it. All right, everybody. Bye-bye. Really appreciate you being here today. And just keep up with the news. It's crazy. Bye-bye.